December 9th, 1889, Chicago's coming of age. It's opening night of the Auditorium Theater. On stage, America's prima donna, Adelina Patti. The opera star sings Home Sweet Home. 5,000 members of the city's elite are here to host the President of the United States, Benjamin Harrison, the Vice President, the Governor of Illinois, and other dignitaries. The theater and its combined hotel, office block, and soaring tower is a masterpiece. Chicagoans could take pride in their incredible achievements and city. Loyola University history professor Harold Platt.
Today, the auditorium still stands as the centerpiece of the Chicago School of Architecture. Magnificent, monumental, modern. For over 100 years, architecture has been one of the city's major contributions to the world. What is the Chicago School of Architecture? Where did it come from? To find out, we're going to take a look at the work of Louis Sullivan. More than anyone else, he was the father of modern architecture.
The Great Fire of 1871 had left the city in ashes. "20 years later, Chicago had risen like a phoenix to become the second largest city in the nation. An industrial and commercial beehive, the metropolis of the West. The Columbian Exposition of 1893 helped establish Chicago as one of the world's great urban centers. The city's coming of age can be traced to the construction of the Auditorium Theater. The auditorium, perhaps the world's most massive structure at the time, was the achievement of architect Louis Sullivan and his partner, Dankmar Adler. Curator of Architecture at the Chicago Historical Society, Wim de Wit.
Architects all over the East Coast knew that there would be a lot of work for them here in this city. Everybody who had ideas of what could be done with a whole new city came here to work here and try to find business.
Architects are the artists of the city. Unlike other art forms, architecture is uniquely public. It defines the urban environment. Sullivan's famous doctrine that form follows function inspired a generation of builders from Frank Lloyd Wright to Mies van der Rohe. And Sullivan's legacy continues today as a new generation of postmodernists strive to restore a sense of ornamentation and beauty that were his hallmarks. Sullivan was not only a master artist, but also a pioneer in a new form of building, the skyscraper. Chicago gave birth to the skyscraper because the city's densely packed central business district did not leave much room to spread out, only up. After the Great Fire of 1871, the population doubled to 500,000 within a decade, then doubled again by 1890 to more than 1 million people. They came because there were jobs. Robert Brugman, architectural historian at the University of Illinois, Chicago.
Chicago had the reputation of being a hustling town, a town of go-getters. People came here to make their fortune. They were very impatient with the trammels, with the conventions of the east, of New York, of London, of Paris. They wanted to start afresh. The buck was the great motivating factor in Chicago. And I think for that reason they were willing to do things that hadn't been done before.
By the mid-1880s, downtown was running out of room. The railroads insisted on terminals at the very doorstep of the central business district. The stations clamped a ring of iron around it. Train tracks on the south, east, and west sides, along with the Chicago River to the north, severely cut the available land to a mere 75 blocks. Here, a growing corps of office workers competed for more space. Storekeepers, shipping agents, small manufacturers, innkeepers, theater operators, government officials, lawyers, commodity brokers, and a host of others. All needed to be at the center of the action. In 1880, cable cars started to clatter around a loop. They poured even more people downtown. It added incredible pressures on land values, rents, and demand for more space. Every piece of property was occupied. About the only way to add more room was to tear buildings down and put up taller ones. The Rookery is a good example of how the city's architects and their business clients first responded to the need to move up. Built in 1885, the Rookery got its name by taking the place of the post-fire City Hall and Water Tower, where Chicago's pigeons roosted. Daniel Burnham and John Root designed the 10-story brick building at Adams and LaSalle. It's one of the final monuments of the art of masonry architecture, according to historian Carl Condit. The sky seemed the limit. But 4 years later, in 1889, the limit turned out to be just 16 stories. Burnham and Root built the Monadnock building at Dearborn and Jackson.
We tend to think of this building currently as a rather benign building, only 16 stories tall, but at the time this was a blockbuster, and it aroused both tremendous admiration, terrific anticipation of the future, but also a lot of fear and apprehension. This was a building that blocked the sun, brought great winds, currents to the street. There was fear that if a fire got started, it would never be able to be put out.
When brick and mortar walls outside hold the building up, every window and door is a weak spot. The architects had to design a base with walls that were 6 feet thick. But in sharp contrast to the Rookery, the Monadnock looks modern with austere, unadorned slab walls.
The building that we're looking at here, the building by the Brooks Brothers, is a new kind of building. It's a speculative office building. This wasn't the headquarters of a corporation. It wasn't a memorial to a wealthy person. It didn't even have the Brooks Brothers name on it. It was a spec building. It was a building for rent, a building to make money. And I think that what Chicagoans did, and did supremely well, was to translate into architectural terms this new kind of economy.
The Monadnock, like the Rookery, was an instant commercial success. Along with Adler and Sullivan's auditorium, these structures blended beauty and technology of the late 1880s. At the same time, these buildings can be seen as stepping stones to a taller, more original office building. To build higher, architects needed to discover new building materials and technologies. But the engineering problems of skyscrapers were more easily solved than creating an original American public art form. In the 1880s, architects began to experiment with new building techniques: electricity-powered lights, elevators, water pumps, and fans. And new ways were invented to make glass for large picture windows. Maybe most important, the steel I-beam. It would turn the heavy outside walls of buildings into nearly invisible skeletons inside. The same method of construction is used to build modern skyscrapers. The Sears Tower shows that with steel-framed design, the sky's almost the limit again.
The use of metal to carry the entire load of a building was new in the 1880s. It came about gradually through a lot of trial and error, but by the turn of the 1890s, by about 1890, buildings like this Monadnock building ceased really to be economical. It was known that you could build much more easily with a steel skeleton construction. That is, a skeleton on the inside, all of steel, that holds up the entire weight of the building.
Another Chicago architect, William LeBaron Jenney, helped to work out the engineering of the skyscraper. Jenney was a bridge builder. And that's how he approached the structural aspects of truly tall buildings. In 1889, Jenny built the second Leader building on State Street, which later became the Sears store. Hardly a skyscraper, you can see the start of the steel cage in this building's design. The base and cornices of the columns carry remnants of classical ornamentation, but its appearance speaks a new architectural language. The building structure is all steel and iron, not masked with heavy masonry walls. Slender columns cover the structural members. The steel frame with picture windows allows daylight to shine deep into the lower floors. The Leader store was a bold departure in public art, one soon repeated all over the Loop. One critic remarked that the skyscraper has been constructed with the same science of a steel railway bridge of the first order. Designed for space, light, ventilation, and security, they are giant structures, healthy to look at, lightsome and airy while substantial. Skyscrapers are the great commercial houses of a great city. Creating an original architecture for America went far beyond engineering into artistic genius. Where an artist's inspiration comes from is hard to say. But we are lucky in the case of Louis Sullivan. His autobiography gives us insight into the search for a public art form that would embody contemporary feelings. Sullivan got formal training in Boston and Paris, but he found Chicago, the metropolis of the West, best represented the spirit of the age. He called for an organic architecture, like that found in the Auditorium building. The pure, clean, and deep inspiration of the human race flowing as a stream of living water from its wellspring to the sea. This seeking for a natural expression of our lives, of our thoughts, our meditations, our feelings, is the architectural art as I understand it.
And the ornament always tries to grow through the structure. You have this very clear structure of the horizontals and the verticals, and the ornament, you always get the feeling it's just growing over the edge. It's growing through that structure, and that gives you this feeling like it's growing upward, and you get a feeling like that's what suggests that the building is grown organically, and that it leads your eye up to the top.
Sullivan felt a sense of power, vitality, and growth, stripped of pretension in Chicago in the 1880s and 90s, not like the cities of the East. The Auditorium building, for example, reflects simplicity and energy on a massive scale, a true monument to the city's commercial enterprise. In Chicago, the businessman needed tall, functional buildings. It fit with the artist's search for what Sullivan called a realistic architecture based on well-defined utilitarian needs. This would mean that building forms would grow naturally out of these needs and express them frankly and freshly. Form follows function, which would mean, in practice, that architecture might again become a living art. Even an elevator could become a statement of organic architecture, such as the one from the Stock Exchange building.
And what Sullivan did here in this elevator was explaining proudly how far technology had brought us in the 1890s. That thanks to the elevator we can build high-rise buildings. And the way he did was these circles. When you look at old photographs of these elevators, then you see that all these cables were hanging there and the wheels on top of the elevator cars, and it was all working through each other. This grill work creates this beautiful shadow on the background, and then you see the wheels of the car and you see the cables, and it looks like the cables are going around these circles, and it is like it's all movement, and it is like this is what's happening here. It's very clear to you what is happening behind that grill work. The ornament has a function.
The Wirt-Dexter building on South Wabash Avenue near Harrison was one of the earliest examples of Sullivan's search for an original art form for the skyscraper. Construction started in 1887, and over 100 years later, its lines are clean and bold. They express powerful vertical movement. Sullivan brought the new engineering and his organic art to fruition 3 years later with the landmark Wainwright building in St. Louis. This 10-story structure projected an original art for the skyscraper. You cannot mistake the vertical power and majesty.
He says high-rise buildings you actually should compare to the way a column is composed. A column in architecture consists of a base, a shaft, and at the top the capital. And he builds the Wainwright building up in exactly the same way. You have a base of the store windows and the mezzanine, then you get the shaft, which are the office floors, and Sullivan says office floors are all the same. There's no reason to make any distinction between the difference in the floors. You all design them exactly the same way. And the way he uses the piers in that part of the building, they even look like the flutings on a Greek column. And then you get to the top, which is the cornice frieze, and that is like the capital in a column. That's the top, and that's where the structure ends.
The American art of the skyscraper quickly blossomed. Over the next few years, Sullivan drew out his concepts in several projects, including a 36-story office tower and a unified approach to building a whole urban district of high-rises. The Chicago Stock Exchange was one of his most beautiful works. Like many of Sullivan's buildings in Chicago, it has fallen under the wrecker's ball. Wim de Wit.
The most important function of the building was the trading room, which was on the second floor. And the ornament on the outside of the building tells you where this floor is and that there is something special happening there. The way he uses the ornament there, and one still can see in the Art Institute and the reconstruction of this trading room how well done the ornament was, and what a beautiful space he could create in his architecture.
Built in the early 1900s, the Carson Perry Scott department store at State and Madison still stands as a magnificent tribute to Sullivan's artistic genius. The upper story's broad picture windows foreshadowed clean, efficient lines of architecture in the 20th century. On the street, Sullivan let his love for organic ornamentation play. Display windows are framed with elaborate cast iron floral designs to capture shoppers' attention. Loyola professor Michael Masi.
The approximate reconciliation of function and ornamentation in the Carson building would have to be seen in the decorations around the windows, which Louis Sullivan saw as feminine. And in fact, he saw the merchandise in the windows as appealing mostly to female, and this kind of lace motif that goes around the windows is supposed to catch the female eye. He had a sort of organic feeling about his ornamentation. Perhaps it is the thought of organic growth climbing out of the structure.
Sullivan's use of ornamentation seems self-indulgent, maybe even an obsession. But his main entrance seems remarkably imaginative. Here, Sullivan showed his artistry with something other than a sunburst arch at the entrance. The corner doorway is an almost irresistible draw to pedestrians. And its corner location is integrated organically into the building's upper floors. After the turn of the century, Sullivan was pushed aside by Burnham and other promoters of a neoclassical Beaux Arts style. The World's Fair of 1893 revived neoclassical fashions. The influence of the Chicago school fell.
That is the real tragic aspect of his life, I think, that he thought that he was understandable to everybody, and that was not the case. And that's why people didn't come back to him after a while.
The city's building boom continued. Established firms like Daniel Burnham and Hullabard and Roche still drew many clients. But the buildings they put up followed fashions of design from New York. This shift was disastrous for the Chicago School of Architecture's chief spokesman, Louis Sullivan.
He slowly became an alcoholic and died, as you know, in poverty, in a flop house on the south side. He died a poor and broken man. Even if he'd had money, he'd have been a broken man.
The Chicago School of Architecture and the skyscraper were responses to pressing needs for more commercial space downtown. The need for taller structures in the Loop inspired something more than just engineering solutions to the use of steel and glass as building materials. An original public art form to express the spirit of America was courageously forged by a community of architects: Sullivan, Adler, Burnham, Root, Hullabard. For a generation, these men led the nation in defining new urban environments for the people of the city. Their work left a permanent legacy by creating the modern skyline of Chicago. And the contributions of Sullivan and his disciples, like Frank Lloyd Wright, would continue to influence European artistic circles.
Ironically, the style created by the Chicago School would return to dominate architecture in the United States following World War II. However, now it would be called the International style. More recently, architects have revolted against the sterile, inhuman high-rise that it produced. They are rediscovering the true meaning and beauty of Sullivan's organic style of architecture. For Sullivan, of course, vindication has come much too late.